I didn't expect my husband to say that in front of my parents. In fact, I didn't expect him to say it at all. The words left his lips with the precision of a knife's edge, slicing through the air and pinning me in place. For a second, I thought I had misheard. But no, the stunned silence that fell over the table confirmed every syllable had landed exactly where he intended. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, the roasted potatoes cooling in the air between my plate and my lips. And in that moment, the sound of my own heartbeat seemed louder than the clinking of cutlery had been seconds before. Across from me, my mother's painted smile stiffened into something brittle, and my father's eyes dropped to his wine glass as though it suddenly held the answers to life's most impossible questions. The evening had started with such careful civility, the kind my family had mastered for decades: polite exchanges, a little laughter in all the right places, and just enough wine to blur the edges of our discomfort without drowning in it. My parents' dining room glowed with the golden light of the chandelier, casting everything in that warm, deceitful hue that makes even the coldest moments look inviting. Ethan sat to my right, perfectly composed, his hand occasionally brushing mine in those subtle, reassuring touches that told the world, "See, we're fine." Except we weren't. We hadn't been for weeks, and the more I replay the days leading up to that dinner, the more I realize Ethan had been preparing for something. Not reconciliation, not an apology, but an ambush. Margaret, my mother, had been unusually quiet that evening, sipping her wine with slow deliberation, her gaze drifting between Ethan and me in a way I couldn't quite read. She had always been a woman who measured her words like gold coins, spending them only when they could purchase control. Robert, my father, kept to his usual role, the silent observer, a man who mastered the art of blending into the furniture when tension threatened to boil over. I was so accustomed to their patterns that I didn't see the rupture coming. If I had, maybe I could have stopped it, or maybe I would have run. The conversation had been circling around harmless topics: the renovations on my parents' summer house, my sister Clara's latest creative career detour, when Ethan's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. His shoulders straightened, his fingers stopped playing with his wine glass, and there was a stillness in him that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. He cleared his throat, looked directly at my parents, and in a voice both steady and deliberate said, "I think it's time Alice knows the truth about me and your mother." Just like that. No build-up, no warning. For a heartbeat I thought he must be joking, some horribly inappropriate attempt at humor, but Ethan wasn't smiling. His eyes were locked on Margaret, whose own gaze didn't flinch. The silence that followed felt like a living thing, stretching across the table and wrapping itself around my chest until I could barely breathe. I searched their faces, desperate for some sign that I had misunderstood, that there was another meaning hidden in those words, but all I found were expressions I couldn't recognize, a strange mix of challenge, resignation, and something far darker. I heard my own voice, brittle and too high, ask, What are you talking about?" Ethan didn't look at me. Instead, he kept his attention fixed on my mother, as though my reaction was merely collateral damage in whatever battle they were waging. "It's time, Margaret," he said quietly, and the way he spoke her name, not Mom, not Mrs. Bennet, but Margaret, made my stomach twist. My mother's fingers tightened around her wine stem until I thought it might snap, yet she didn't speak. My father stayed frozen, as though any movement might shatter what little control he had left. In that suspended moment, I felt a strange detachment, like I was hovering above the scene, watching it unfold in slow motion. My life, my marriage, my family, all of it hung in the air, seconds away from collapse. And somewhere, deep in the pit of my stomach, an instinct whispered that this wasn't the beginning of a fight. It was the beginning of the end. The weeks before that dinner now replay in my mind like a series of warnings I stubbornly ignored. It began subtly. Ethan coming home later than usual, the faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine clinging to his shirts, the way he seemed to avoid my gaze in quiet moments. He claimed it was just work, a big project for a demanding client, but I've been married long enough to know the tone a man's voice takes when he's rehearsed his excuses. Still, I swallowed my unease, telling myself it was exhaustion, not betrayal, that curved his shoulders and kept him distant in bed. I didn't want to believe that something had shifted so completely between us, and I certainly didn't imagine my mother's name had anything to do with it. There was one night, about 2 weeks before the dinner, when he stood by the kitchen window in the dark, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low voice. I caught fragments. "Not now. She'll find out. I can't keep—" Then he stopped when he saw my reflection in the glass. His face softened instantly, the mask slipping back into place. "Just Daniel," he said, smiling faintly, but his voice didn't match his expression. Daniel had always been a shadowy figure in our marriage. Ethan's best friend, yes, but also a man with a guarded demeanor and eyes that seemed to measure me every time we met. I brushed it off, because in our home, brushing things off had become an unspoken pact. Around the same time, I noticed my mother's texts to me became oddly inquisitive about Ethan's schedule. "Will Ethan be joining us for lunch this Sunday? Has Ethan been working late again?" Harmless questions on the surface, but there was a weight behind them I couldn't quite place. Margaret Bennett wasn't the type to show idle curiosity. Every question she asked had a purpose, a thread she meant to pull. It should have struck me as strange, but my mother's brand of interest was so rare in my life that I clung to it, mistaking manipulation for maternal concern. The Saturday before the dinner, Ethan suggested we host a family evening to clear the air. The phrase was odd, because no one had acknowledged any air needing clearing. He was unusually attentive that day, cooking breakfast, bringing me coffee in bed, wrapping his arm around my waist in a way that almost felt like the man I married. But beneath it, there was a tension in his movements, like every smile cost him effort. I didn't realize then that this was the performance before the reveal, the calm before a storm he had already decided to unleash. I remember dressing for that dinner with a sense of almost ritualistic care, choosing a deep green dress Ethan once said made my eyes look like glass. I wanted peace that night, to remind him, and maybe myself, of what we still had. When he kissed my temple before we left, there was a stillness in him, a pause that should have warned me, but I leaned into the warmth of his lips, ignoring the coldness in his eyes. I told myself it was stress, not a goodbye in disguise. Even at the table that night, before the sentence that split my world, I noticed the undercurrent. My father's quiet was thicker than usual. My mother's small talk was too precise, and Clara was fidgeting with her napkin in a way that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Every detail was a stitch in the tapestry of something I couldn't yet see, and I didn't pull on any of them. If I had, maybe I would have unraveled the whole thing before Ethan could detonate it in front of everyone. Now looking back, I realized that the dinner wasn't an accident. It was the endpoint of a carefully laid path. Ethan had been steering us toward that night for weeks, perhaps months. Each late arrival, each half-truth, each carefully staged interaction with my parents serving as stepping stones toward the moment he looked across the table and told me that my marriage was not what I thought it was. And the cruelest part? Somewhere deep down, I think a part of me already knew. When I first met Ethan, it was one of those cinematic moments people like to romanticize. I was standing outside a small art gallery in the city, fumbling with my umbrella in the pouring rain, when he appeared beside me with that easy, confident smile. "You look like you could use a rescue," he'd said, offering to walk me inside. From that night on, he made me feel like I'd stepped into a story where I was the central character, where the world had finally decided to give me something good. My parents adored him almost instantly, especially my mother, who praised his manners and ambition as if she had personally chosen him for me. At the time, I took it as approval, validation, a rare gift from her. Ethan was everything my parents thought a man should be: polished, successful, articulate. He could charm waitstaff and CEOs with equal ease, and he always seemed to know exactly what to say to make people feel seen. I'd spent most of my life being overlooked in my own family, so his attention was intoxicating. He remembered small details, like the way I hated lilies because of their funereal scent, or how I couldn't sleep without the window slightly open. He made me feel as though someone had finally studied me, understood me. I never imagined that kind of precision could also be used to wound. In those early months, dinners with my parents felt like small victories. Margaret, who rarely smiled unless she had reason to, laughed at Ethan's jokes. Robert engaged in conversations longer than his usual grunts and nods. Clara even seemed to relax around him, her sharp edges softening in his presence. I remember thinking, this is it. I've finally built something worth keeping. It's almost cruel now to look back at those moments, knowing how carefully he was weaving himself into the fabric of my family, not just into my life. The first time I noticed something off was subtle, too subtle for me to put my finger on. It was a summer barbecue at my parents' house. I came outside carrying a tray of drinks and saw Ethan and my mother in the corner of the garden, their heads close together. They were laughing at something, and though there was nothing overtly intimate about the scene, There was an ease between them that didn't match the timeline of our relationship. When they saw me, the conversation stopped abruptly, replaced by those polite, slightly too bright smiles people wear when they've been caught. I told myself it was nothing, because the alternative felt absurd. Over the years, I filed away a handful of moments like that, tiny observations I buried under the weight of trust. A glance that lingered too long, an inside joke I wasn't part of, the way Ethan sometimes referred to my mother by her first name, even when we were alone. I thought it was simply his way of being charming, of fitting in with my family. I didn't consider that fitting in might have been the plan all along. It's strange how love can make you edit the story in real time, rewriting details to fit the version you want to believe. If there's one thing Ethan was exceptional at, it was building a perfect facade. He made our marriage look effortless to the outside world, a union people envied. Behind closed doors, the cracks were small enough to ignore at first. My opinions brushed aside, decisions made without me, a quiet but persistent sense that I was somehow the least important person in my own home. And yet, I clung to the image he projected, because it was easier than confronting the possibility that I'd been fooled from the very start. I see it now, the way Ethan played the long game, how his charm wasn't just a gift, but a weapon. He didn't simply win my heart. He won my parents' trust, my sister's affection, the approval of everyone whose opinion mattered to me. By the time I realized there was something calculated about it, it was too late. He was already too deeply embedded in my life, and I was too invested in the illusion to tear it apart. Which is why, when he spoke those words at the dinner table, the betrayal wasn't just in what he confessed. It was in realizing he had been planting the seeds for years. It's strange, the things that shape you without your consent. My childhood wasn't the kind you read about in warm, nostalgic essays. It was a house of rules, of unspoken expectations, of love rationed out like water in a drought. Margaret Bennett, my mother, believed in appearances above all else. We were the family that smiled for photographs no matter what was festering beneath the surface. If I cried, I was told to compose myself. If I failed, I was reminded that failure was unacceptable. Love was conditional. Do well, behave, look perfect, and you might earn a sliver of it. Robert Bennett, my father, was not cruel, but he was absent in the way a ghost is absent. There and not there, existing on the edges of my life. He never raised his voice, never offered comfort. His way of parenting was to avoid making waves, to let Margaret's words stand as law. I often wondered if he was afraid of her, or simply too tired to resist. Either way, his silence taught me something dangerous, that enduring pain quietly was preferable to fighting for change. That lesson would haunt my choices for years, especially in my marriage to Ethan. I grew up watching my mother control every interaction, not with shouting or punishment, but with subtle, precise manipulations. A raised eyebrow could deflate me more than any lecture. A small, disapproving smile could keep me awake for nights, replaying whatever I had done wrong. When I brought home school awards, she accepted them as though they were her due. When I stumbled, she made it clear the embarrassment wasn't mine alone. It reflected on her. So I learned to hide my missteps, to make my life look immaculate, even when it was falling apart. By the time I met Ethan, I was primed for someone like him. He knew how to make me feel seen without challenging the walls I had built. He slid into my life like a missing puzzle piece, filling the space where warmth should have been. My mother's approval of him was intoxicating. It was one of the few times in my life I felt I had made a choice she truly endorsed. I mistook that alignment for safety, not realizing that her reasons for liking Ethan might have nothing to do with me at all. There were moments in my marriage when I felt like a child again, seeking permission instead of partnership. I deferred to Ethan on decisions that should have been mine, swallowed my discomfort when his attention wandered, convinced myself that voicing my needs would make me unlovable. It wasn't that Ethan demanded my silence. It was that silence had been my native language since birth, and he knew how to exploit that without ever seeming cruel. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just needed to withhold. The irony is, I once thought Ethan saved me from becoming my mother. I thought his love proved I could have a different kind of life, one not defined by control and coldness. But the truth that began to crystallize the night of that dinner, is that I didn't escape my mother at all. I married a man who, in his own polished way, understood her better than I did, and that was never a coincidence. Looking back now, I can see how my past built the perfect bridge for Ethan to walk straight into my most vulnerable places. He didn't have to break down my defenses. They were already designed to let him in. I didn't just marry my husband. I married the echoes of my childhood, the same patterns dressed up in different clothes. And on the night he spoke those words in front of my parents, I realized the ghosts of my past hadn't just followed me into adulthood. They had been sitting at my table all along. It was just past midnight when I woke to the faint creak of the floorboards outside our bedroom. At first, I thought it was Ethan heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, but when I reached out, the space beside me was already cold. The house was quiet, except for the low murmur of voices drifting from down the hall. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and padded toward the source. The words were muffled, but the tones were unmistakable. Ethan's deep, deliberate cadence, and Clara's lighter, nervous voice. My pulse quickened before I could even make sense of why. I stopped just short of the hallway corner, pressing my back to the wall, straining to catch the fragments. "You can't keep doing this," Clara whispered, her voice sharp but shaking. Ethan's reply was low, almost soothing. "I'm trying to protect her, Clara. You know that." The word protect sent a chill through me. Protect me from what? Or worse, protect himself from me. The sound of Clara's uneven breathing made it clear she was holding back tears. I'd never heard my sister sound so afraid. "Margaret is going to find out," Clara said, and for a moment my mind tripped over itself trying to place the pieces. My mother's name on her lips in that context felt like the wrong note in a familiar song. Ethan's response was sharper this time. "She already knows. She's the one who—" His voice dropped too low for me to hear the rest, but the sudden silence between them was heavier than any words. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from gasping, my heart thundering in my ears. I wanted to step into the light, to demand answers right then, but something in me froze. It was the same paralysis I'd felt as a child when I overheard my parents fighting in hushed voices late at night, the sense that hearing the truth might be worse than not knowing. So I stayed hidden, rooted in place, my skin prickling with the certainty that I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't yet see in full. When I finally heard their footsteps approaching, I slipped silently back into the bedroom, sliding under the covers and forcing my breathing to steady. A moment later, Ethan entered, his movements quiet but deliberate, as though he assumed I was asleep. I kept my eyes closed, pretending, even as I felt the mattress dip under his weight. He didn't touch me. He just lay there, still, his breathing measured, the kind of stillness that feels like waiting. Sleep was impossible after that. My mind chased itself in frantic circles, replaying every word I'd overheard, dissecting every pause. Clara's fear, Ethan's calm, the mention of my mother, they tangled together into a knot I couldn't untie. I told myself I would confront him in the morning, but by daylight my courage had withered under the weight of my own doubt. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. That's what I told myself, because the alternative felt too dangerous to name. Looking back, I think that was the moment when the foundation of my marriage began to crack in earnest. Not when Ethan confessed at the dinner table, but in that dark hallway, where I stood hidden in the shadows, listening to my husband and my sister speak about my mother in tones that suggested alliances I couldn't yet fathom. I didn't know it then, but the truth had already been circling me for weeks, and I was about to find out just how close it was willing to get. Daniel called me on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day that should have been forgettable. I was at my desk grading papers when my phone buzzed with his name, a name that rarely appeared on my screen, unless it was about some social gathering Ethan had arranged. His voice was different this time, lower, as if he were speaking from the corner of a dark room. "Alice, you need to be careful." There was no greeting, no small talk, just those words, heavy and deliberate, landing in my ear like a stone dropped into still water. My pen stilled over the page in front of me. I asked him what he meant, but he sidestepped. "Things aren't what you think. I can't say more right now, but just be ready." His tone had a quiet urgency, not the kind that comes from gossip, but from danger. I pressed him again, and he hesitated. "If I tell you too much, it'll put you in a position you're not ready for." That sentence lodged in my mind. Not ready for, as if there was some truth out there so heavy it would crush me if I wasn't braced for it. What is this about? Is it Ethan? The silence on the other end was answer enough, but Daniel finally muttered, "It's not just Ethan." The way he said it, with a slow, careful weight, made my skin prickle. My eyes drifted to the framed photo on my desk, Ethan and me on our wedding day, my mother standing just behind us, her hand on Ethan's arm. For the first time, the image didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a warning I'd been too blind to see. Daniel ended the call abruptly, promising he'd explain soon. I stared at my phone long after the line went dead, the unanswered questions clawing at my chest. Why would Ethan's closest friend come to me like this, skirting around the truth as if it were flammable? Why not tell me outright? The vagueness was almost worse than a confession. It left space for my mind to fill in the blanks with possibilities that grew darker the longer I thought about them. That evening, I tried to act normal. Ethan came home, kissed my cheek, and asked about my day as though nothing was wrong. But every smile he gave me, every casual gesture, felt rehearsed. I wanted to ask him point blank what Daniel had meant, to watch his face when I mentioned the call, but fear kept my tongue still. If there was something to be uncovered, I wanted to see it on my terms, not have it smoothed over with one of Ethan's effortless explanations. That night, lying in bed beside him, I replayed Daniel's voice in my head. It's not just Ethan. The words twisted into every corner of my thoughts, making me question things I'd never dared to before. Was my mother involved somehow? Was Clara? The memory of that whispered hallway conversation returned like a splinter under my skin, sharper now, more dangerous. If Daniel was right, then this wasn't just a marriage problem. It was something much bigger, something tangled in the roots of my family. I didn't know it yet, but Daniel's warning was the last fragile thread holding back the flood. Once it snapped, everything, my trust, my marriage, my family history, would be pulled under. I'd been drifting toward this revelation for weeks, blind to the shape it was taking. And now, with Daniel's voice still echoing in my mind, I could feel the current quickening beneath me, dragging me toward something I wasn't sure I'd survive. The week after our fight felt like an eternity, each day stretching into an endless blur of avoidance and unspoken words. David and I still lived under the same roof, but it was as if we had become strangers trapped in the same house. He buried himself in work, coming home late with the faint smell of coffee and exhaustion clinging to him, while I wandered through the rooms like a ghost, touching the furniture as if reminding myself that this was still my home. Every interaction was reduced to brief nods, the occasional good night, or a perfunctory, "Do you need anything from the store?" I had never known silence to be so loud. One night, unable to sleep, I went down to the kitchen to make tea and found him sitting at the table in the dark, his head bowed, fingers intertwined. The sight startled me, not because he was there, but because he looked so broken. His shoulders trembled slightly, and though his face was hidden in shadows, I could see the glint of moisture in his eyes. I wanted to reach out, to ask him what demons were gnawing at him, but my pride, wounded and raw from the accusations he'd hurled at me, kept me rooted to the spot. Instead, I quietly made my tea and returned upstairs, my heart aching with questions I was too afraid to voice. In the days that followed, his distance began to feel almost intentional, as though he were hiding something more than just anger. I started noticing small details I had once overlooked, the way he kept his phone face down, the new tension in his voice whenever it buzzed, the guarded look in his eyes when I asked about his day. It was like standing in front of a locked door, hearing muffled noises from the other side, but not knowing whether to knock or walk away. My instincts told me that whatever was behind that door could change everything. One evening I found myself wandering through the attic, looking for an old photo album. The air was heavy with dust, and the floorboards groaned under my steps. As I dug through boxes of forgotten memories, birthday cards, high school trophies, letters from people who had faded from our lives, I stumbled upon a small wooden box tucked behind a stack of winter blankets. It was unmarked, but something about it felt deliberately hidden. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a stack of envelopes tied together with a faded ribbon, each one addressed to David in the same delicate handwriting. Curiosity outweighed caution, and I pulled one out. The first line made my stomach tighten. "I know you said we should keep this between us, but I can't stop thinking about her and wondering if she knows the truth." I froze. The her in that sentence could only mean me, but the rest of the letter was so cryptic, it left more questions than answers. It didn't mention love or betrayal outright, but the tone carried a weight that made my chest constrict. My mind immediately spiraled. Was this about an affair, or something even deeper, more dangerous? That night, I lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling while David slept beside me, his breathing steady and untroubled. I kept replaying the words from the letter in my mind, trying to piece them together with the changes I'd seen in him, the growing distance, the way he seemed almost afraid to meet my gaze. Whatever this was, it wasn't small. It was big enough to gnaw at him in the dark and keep him from looking me in the eye. I decided then that I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. If David wouldn't tell me the truth, I would have to find it myself. And something deep in my gut told me that the truth, when it finally came out, wouldn't just explain his behavior. It would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. The days after my confrontation with Daniel passed in a haze of anxiety and unspoken tension. I tried to bury myself in work, but my thoughts were a storm I couldn't quiet. Every glance from him, every small silence between us, carried an unspoken question. Would I uncover the truth before it destroyed us completely? One evening, as I walked home from the office, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate. "Mrs. Thompson, you don't know me, but I know about Daniel. I think you deserve to hear what he's hiding." My heart froze. The stranger didn't give a name, only an address, before hanging up. That night, I barely touched my dinner. Daniel noticed, of course, his eyes narrowing slightly as if reading my every thought. "Long day?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. I nodded, avoiding his gaze, feeling like any sudden movement might reveal my secret plan to him. I told him I was going to bed early, but instead, I sat awake in the dark, my mind replaying the cryptic call. Who was that person? And why did they sound almost sorry for me? At some point in the early hours, I decided I had to go to that address, no matter the risk. The next day, I called in sick to work, dressed inconspicuously, and drove across town to a quiet neighborhood I'd never visited before. The address led me to a modest brick house with ivy creeping up its sides. My hands trembled as I knocked. An older woman with kind, tired eyes opened the door. "You must be Alice," she said softly, as though she'd been expecting me for years. "Come in. There's something you should see." She led me to a small living room, where a stack of old letters sat neatly tied with a ribbon. My name was on the top envelope, written in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. I hesitated before opening the first one. It was dated 8 years ago, before Daniel and I even met. The words inside were raw, filled with grief. He wrote about losing someone named Clara, about guilt that gnawed at him daily, about a promise he had made to her family. My chest tightened with confusion. Clara? Why had he never mentioned her? The woman explained gently. Clara was my daughter, and Daniel's fiancée. She died suddenly. He's been carrying something heavy ever since. I felt my world tilt, as if the ground itself had shifted under me. Driving home, the weight of that revelation crushed me. My mind screamed with more questions than answers. Why had he hidden something so monumental? Was our marriage built on a lie? I wanted to burst through the door and demand the truth, but part of me feared what he might say. That night, Daniel came home late. His shirt smelled faintly of rain and unfamiliar perfume. I lay in bed, feigning sleep, but my chest ached with suspicion. The letters burned in my bag, their ink searing into my conscience. Over the next few days, I observed him carefully. Every smile seemed a little too rehearsed, every touch a little too measured. When I mentioned Clara casually, just to see his reaction, his body tensed. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked sharply, his voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. I brushed it off, pretending it was nothing, but inside, I knew I had stumbled onto a truth he would do anything to protect. The silence between us became suffocating. I began to feel like I was living with a stranger who was bound to a past I didn't understand, a past that might explain every odd behavior, every lie, every late night. I didn't know it yet, but the next time Clara's name came up, it would change everything, not just between us, but for everyone sitting at that dinner table with my parents, and the truth would be nothing like I expected. I woke the next morning to the hollow silence of the house, the kind that seemed to press against my ears until I could hear my own pulse. Jonathan wasn't beside me. The sheet on his side was cold, telling me he had been up for hours, or maybe hadn't come to bed at all. My chest tightened. I forced myself up, my legs shaky, and followed the faint scent of coffee down to the kitchen. He was there, leaning against the counter, staring out the window as if the garden held the answers to questions he couldn't ask me. His eyes didn't lift when I entered, and that hurt more than any argument we had ever had. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my voice still gravelly from the night. He shook his head without turning to face me. "There's something I need to tell you, Alice," he murmured, his tone almost too calm, and my stomach churned. He placed a mug of coffee in front of me and sat opposite, his fingers drumming on the table, a sure sign he was trying to control himself. My mind raced. Was this about last night's strange phone call, or about how tense he had been since visiting my parents? The air between us was so thick with unspoken words I could barely breathe. He took a deep breath, as though bracing for impact. "Your father called me last night," he finally said, his gaze locked on mine. My heart skipped a beat. "Why would my father call you?" I asked, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. Jonathan hesitated, choosing his words with surgical precision. "He wanted me to know something about you. He thought I should hear it from him before you said anything." I gripped my mug so tightly it felt like my knuckles would split. What could my father possibly have told him? And why did Jonathan look like he was both furious and devastated? When he finally spoke again, it was like the ground beneath me gave way. He said, "There's a part of your past you've hidden from me. Something about the night your sister died." The coffee in my throat turned bitter. My hands trembled so badly I had to put the mug down before I spilled it. "Jonathan, you don't know what you're talking about," I managed to whisper. But he leaned forward, his voice shaking now. "Then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you didn't lie to me about where you were that night." A cold wave crashed over me, pulling me back to that night like a cruel undertow. The rain, the screech of tires, the metallic taste of fear, it all came rushing back in vivid flashes. I had never told him the truth, not because I wanted to deceive him, but because the truth was too heavy, too dark. "I was trying to protect you," I said finally, tears stinging my eyes. But Jonathan's face hardened. "Protect me from what, Alice? From knowing who you really are?" It was then that I realized the depth of what was unraveling. This wasn't just about a secret. It was about trust, about whether the man who had promised to share his life with me could handle the shadows in mine. My father had planted a seed of doubt, and I could see it growing like poison behind Jonathan's eyes. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. When I couldn't answer, he stood up, pushing the chair back with a sharp scrape. "I'm going out," he said flatly, grabbing his coat. The door slammed behind him, and I was left in the stillness, my hands trembling over a cooling cup of coffee, wondering how much longer I could keep my past from swallowing us both whole. I never thought the sound of my father's voice could feel so much like a blade. "Alice, this has gone far enough," he said, his tone low but loaded with a finality that froze the air. We were seated in my parents' living room, the old chandelier casting warm light on a conversation that felt anything but warm. My mother sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly, as though she could hold the family together through sheer will. Daniel was across from me, leaning forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on my father's as if he'd been waiting for this confrontation his entire life. My pulse thundered in my ears. This was the moment I'd been dreading ever since the first crack appeared between them, the moment when two worlds, my blood family and the man I'd chosen, would collide with no hope of retreat. "You've been keeping secrets, both of you," my father continued, his gaze darting between us like a judge weighing guilt and innocence. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words lodged in my throat. He wasn't entirely wrong. Daniel had been distant, carrying shadows in his eyes that he never fully explained, and I had been pretending not to notice, hoping that love alone could mend whatever was broken. "We deserve to know the truth," my mother said softly, her voice trembling in a way that cut deeper than anger ever could. "Before this marriage becomes something none of us can recognize." Her plea was not a demand. It was a lifeline, one I wasn't sure either of us could catch. Daniel straightened, his jaw tightening, his chest rising and falling with the measured breath of a man standing on the edge of a confession. "You want the truth?" he asked, his voice sharp enough to make my stomach clench. "Fine, but you won't like it." My father leaned back, his arms crossed, a flicker of something, fear, passing through his eyes. The silence stretched, a taut thread ready to snap. My mind raced with every possible revelation, from financial ruin to betrayal, but none of them prepared me for the way Daniel's expression softened, almost mournfully, before he spoke. "Alice married me without knowing who I really am," Daniel began, his words deliberate, each one landing like a stone in still water. "Not because I lied about my name or my past, but because I've been living with a truth so heavy I couldn't share it. Not until now." My breath caught as he turned to me, his eyes glistening, holding me there as if the entire room had faded away. "Your family, they were not strangers to me before we met." My father's jaw tensed, and my mother's hand flew to her mouth, but still, I couldn't piece together the meaning. Daniel looked down for a moment, gathering courage, then lifted his gaze again with a steadiness that made my heart ache. "I knew your brother Alice," he said quietly. My vision blurred, a rush of heat flooding my chest. My brother, Nathan, the boy who'd vanished from our lives over a decade ago, leaving only police reports, sleepless nights, and unanswered questions. We met in a place you never knew he went, Daniel continued. A place where he trusted no one, until he trusted me. My mother let out a soft gasp, and my father's knuckles whitened on the armrest of his chair. Every cell in my body screamed for him to go on, to rip the bandage off and tell me everything, even if it shattered me. Daniel's voice grew heavier, his words slower, as though they carried the weight of the years between then and now. I saw things your parents never knew about. Nathan was caught in something dangerous, and I tried to help him, but I failed. My heart pounded so hard it hurt, each beat colliding with the grief I'd buried for years. I wanted to scream, to demand why he'd kept this from me, but my mouth stayed shut. The truth was unspooling too quickly for me to catch my breath. My father's face was a storm. Anger, sorrow, suspicion all flashing in the space of a second. "You should have told us the day you met her," my father said finally, his voice trembling under the weight of restrained fury. "Instead, you married her, all the while carrying this ghost between you." My mother reached for my hand, her grip trembling. I stared at Daniel, unable to decide whether I was looking at the man who had betrayed me or the only person who might finally bring me closer to the truth about Nathan. Daniel's expression was unflinching. "Because," he said, his voice steady but raw, "the truth about your brother isn't just mine to tell. Part of it belongs to someone in this room, and until now, they weren't ready to hear it." The room felt smaller after Daniel's words, as if the walls themselves were pressing closer, trying to contain the storm he had unleashed. My parents sat frozen, their hands clutching each other, or their laps as though physical contact could anchor them against the tidal wave of revelation. I couldn't breathe properly. My throat was tight, my heart hammering, and yet I felt my body betray me, trembling uncontrollably as though I had no control over the way I was unraveling. For a brief moment, the only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall, marking each second as a drumbeat of tension. Then my father finally spoke, his voice sharp but brittle, like ice cracking under pressure. "Daniel, tell us everything. Now." His gaze bore into him with a force that demanded truth, and I felt a pang of fear for what was about to come. Daniel inhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling slightly. "I will," he said, voice low but deliberate. "But I need you all to understand. There's danger in this. What I reveal tonight will change everything." My stomach dropped. Danger. That single word carried a weight that made me wish I could curl into a ball and disappear. Daniel's eyes met mine, and for the first time, the intimacy of our marriage, the trust I had clung to, seemed fragile, like a thin pane of glass threatening to shatter. "Your brother, Nathan, he got involved in something he didn't understand," Daniel began, his voice steady, despite the trembling I had seen in his hands moments before. "I met him because he reached out, looking for help, and I tried to protect him, but there were people, dangerous people who didn't want him alive." My blood ran cold. I had spent years thinking Nathan had simply disappeared, a victim of circumstance or neglect. I had never imagined violence or deliberate malice. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and my father's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his chair. "What do you mean, dangerous people?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. Daniel exhaled, closing his eyes briefly, as if forcing himself to continue. "He discovered something. About corruption. People in power who operate in the shadows. He wanted to expose it, and he paid the price for his curiosity." I could barely comprehend it. Nathan, my brother, had been hunted, his life threatened because of secrets no one had told me. The room's atmosphere thickened, suffocating us all. Clara, who had remained unusually quiet, suddenly whispered, "So that's why he disappeared. Why Mom and Dad never said anything." Her voice trembled, carrying a grief I had never known in my sister before. My mother's eyes filled with tears, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She had carried this weight in silence, and now, after years of pretending everything was fine, the truth exploded in our faces like shattering glass. Daniel looked at each of us, his expression softening, but no less intense. "I couldn't tell you before, because telling you would have put you in danger too. Nathan trusted me, and I promised him I'd protect the people he loved. That's why I never spoke, even to Alice, even to you," he said, looking directly at me, his eyes glistening. "Because if the wrong people knew you were involved, even unknowingly, they could have targeted you." My knees weakened. I had been living oblivious, every day of my life unknowingly at risk. I finally spoke, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with disbelief and anger. All this time? All these years? You knew, and no one told me? My own family? And you, Daniel? You let me marry you knowing the danger? His silence was heavy, his gaze filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. The truth was finally out, and yet it was worse than I had imagined. My brother, my family, and even my marriage, everything I thought I knew, had been built on lies, fear, and secrets too dangerous to speak. The house felt colder after the confrontation, as though the walls themselves had absorbed Daniel's confession and exhaled a chill that seeped into every room. I wandered from the living room to the hallway, my hands brushing the wallpaper, searching for anything that felt normal, anything that could anchor me to reality. My parents followed, their steps tentative, as though fear had made them strangers to their own home. Clara lingered near the doorway, silent, eyes wide and fixed on the floor. The truth had landed on us all like a bomb, scattering fragments of safety we had once taken for granted. "I can't believe this," my father muttered, pacing the room. His voice was low, laced with anger and helplessness, the kind that makes even the most confident person shrink under its weight. "How could you hide this from us? From all of us?" Daniel's response was calm but firm. "I hid it because revealing it would have endangered you. I had to protect everyone, especially Alice. The people who were after Nathan, they don't forgive mistakes." Every word he said made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The reality of the danger, which had been abstract until now, settled over me like a heavy blanket of fear. Clara's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "So, all those years, we were safe because Daniel was watching us without telling anyone." Her accusation wasn't bitter. It was desperate, a plea for understanding. Daniel's eyes softened as he nodded. "Yes, I kept my distance. I kept secrets, but it was all to keep you alive. I never wanted to scare you, but hiding it was the only way. I wanted to shout, to demand that the past and present collide in some cathartic release, but words failed me. I could only stand there, my heart pounding, feeling the walls of my life crumble piece by piece. My mother's voice broke, fragile and trembling. "And Alice, all this time, we've been lying to her too. We thought shielding her from Nathan's life would protect her, but we were wrong. We only made her blind to the truth." Her words cut deeper than any argument ever had. The truth was not just dangerous. It was layered, woven into the fabric of our family like a silent poison. My parents had tried to protect me. Daniel had tried to protect me. And Nathan had been caught in the crossfire, a victim of circumstances none of us fully understood. Daniel reached out, his hand hovering over mine, and I flinched. The intimacy of marriage felt strange now, fragile, threatened by the invisible danger we all shared. "I need you to trust me," he said quietly, and I wanted to, but the weight of years of deception made it almost impossible. "We have to be careful. The people who wanted Nathan, they won't stop with him. They might come after anyone connected to him. That includes you, Alice. That includes your family." My chest constricted, and I realized that the dinner table confrontation had merely been the beginning. The storm outside our doors was nothing compared to the storm looming within. For the first time, I understood the depth of what Daniel had endured, the secrets, the distance, the careful watch over everyone I loved. It wasn't betrayal. It was survival. And yet, the anger and confusion that pulsed in my veins made it impossible to forgive completely. I wanted to scream, to demand that years of lies be untangled instantly, but the fear in my chest reminded me that any rash action could cost us everything. We were all trapped in a delicate balance, and one wrong move could shatter it. As night fell, the house felt alive with whispers and shadows, the kind that speak without words. Every creak, every gust of wind, seemed laden with threat. I walked past the window and caught my reflection, pale, wide-eyed, fragile. Yet beneath the fear, a spark ignited, a determination. I had to understand everything, to uncover every hidden thread, because only by confronting the darkness could we hope to survive it. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a chilling realization began to form. The truth about Nathan wasn't just a secret. It was a puzzle with pieces scattered among all of us, waiting for the right hands to put them together, or risk being destroyed forever. I spent the next few days in a haze, moving through the motions of daily life while my mind raced through fragments of memories and revelations. Every detail about Nathan, every conversation Daniel had hinted at, replayed relentlessly in my head. I pored over old photographs, letters, and messages, trying to reconstruct a timeline, desperate to find clues that might explain the full extent of what had happened. It was like walking through a house filled with locked doors, each one leading to something I feared to discover, yet I couldn't stop myself. Each new piece I uncovered sent shivers down my spine, connecting dots I had never seen before. Clara was cautious, watching me work, hovering just outside the rooms I claimed as mine during this obsessive search. Her presence was both comforting and maddening, like a reminder that she knew more than she let on. I wanted to demand answers, to make her confess every secret she'd been holding, but I sensed that pushing too hard might make her shut down entirely. Instead, I focused on the fragments I could control, the letters Nathan had sent to Daniel, the hints of danger he had alluded to, the names scrawled on scraps of paper that I couldn't yet decode. Each discovery felt like stepping closer to a cliff, the end unknown, terrifying, inevitable. One night, I found a journal tucked in the back of Daniel's study, a worn, leather-bound book with Nathan's handwriting spilling across the pages in a messy, urgent scrawl. My hand shook as I opened it, reading the first words. If anyone finds this, it means I've failed. Or worse. The entry detailed meetings with people who wielded power in shadows, who threatened not just him, but anyone close to him. Every paragraph painted a vivid picture of a young man navigating treacherous waters, fighting battles that no one had ever known about. The realization struck me like a physical blow. Nathan had been fighting alone, and we had been blind to it. As I flipped through the pages, a cold fear settled in my stomach. There were names, locations, dates, every piece meticulously recorded, every encounter chronicled as if Nathan had known he might never survive to tell the story himself. And then, at the very end of the journal, a folded letter addressed to me in Daniel's handwriting slipped out. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, and the words made my heart stop. Alice, if you are reading this, it means the danger is real. The people who wanted Nathan are still out there, and now, so are you. Trust no one blindly. Everything you think you know must be questioned. I dropped the letter onto the floor, the pages trembling beneath my fingertips. The room felt suddenly smaller, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in, eager to hear my panic. My mind spun with questions, fears, and memories, trying to piece together who could be trusted, who had been lying, and how deep the danger ran. Daniel had protected us, yes, but he had also withheld the full truth, and now the responsibility to survive, or to unravel completely, was mine. I realized then that I couldn't wait for answers. The danger was active, immediate, and unseen. Every shadow in the hallway, every unknown call or message, could be a sign that someone was watching, someone ready to strike. My parents' ignorance had protected them until now, but it wouldn't be enough if we stayed passive. I had to act. I had to confront the threats, piece together Nathan's final movements, and find a way to protect those I loved before it was too late. By the time morning broke, I had made a decision. The letters, the journal, the warnings, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and it was my responsibility to assemble them. I had to uncover the truth about Nathan, about Daniel's role, about the forces still circling my family, invisible yet lethal. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath fear and uncertainty, a spark ignited. I would not be a passive observer. I would not let secrets and lies dictate our fate. The confrontation was coming, whether we were ready or not. The night air was thick with anticipation as I drove to the address Daniel had traced for me, the only lead left after days of poring over journals, letters, and whispered warnings. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, and every shadow along the quiet streets seemed like a threat. Every flicker of movement in the periphery, a signal that we were being watched. I couldn't call Daniel. He insisted I handle this carefully, that any premature move might alert the wrong people. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had hidden truths from me to protect me, yet now I was tasked with navigating danger almost entirely alone. The house I arrived at was unremarkable from the outside, a simple 2-story structure tucked behind overgrown hedges, but something about its silence screamed tension. I parked, taking a deep breath that trembled in my chest. Each step toward the front door felt like a descent into a trap I couldn't predict. When I knocked, the door creaked open to reveal a dimly lit room stacked with papers, photographs, and maps marked with dates and names. A man emerged from the shadows, his face partially hidden beneath a hoodie, his eyes sharp and wary. "Alice Thompson?" he asked, voice low but steady. "We've been expecting you." The air shifted instantly, charged with the sense that this moment could either end in revelation or catastrophe. The man led me through the cluttered space, explaining in hurried whispers that Nathan had discovered a network operating in plain sight. People in high places manipulating lives for profit, influence, and power. He showed me files containing photographs, letters, and even audio recordings Nathan had risked everything to obtain. The scope of it made my stomach churn. My brother had been a small part of a vast, dangerous machinery, and now, unknowingly, my family was entangled in the same web. I noticed a file with Daniel's handwriting marking several entries. My heart thudded violently. He had been working with Nathan, guiding him, keeping him alive, and yet he had kept me in the dark. I felt a mixture of betrayal and gratitude, a twisted knot of emotions that left me dizzy. "He did it for us," the man said quietly, as though reading my thoughts. He never wanted Alice or her family to know the full extent until it was absolutely necessary. He risked everything to keep you safe. My hands trembled as I clutched the folder, realizing the weight of the responsibility I had now inherited. Suddenly, a noise at the back of the house froze me in place, a door slamming, the echo sharp against the walls. Shadows moved in the corners of the room. My pulse spiked, and adrenaline surged through my veins. The man grabbed my arm, whispering, "They know you're here. We don't have much time." Panic clawed at me, but beneath it, a fierce determination flared. I had come too far to back down. Nathan's fight, Daniel's sacrifices, and my family's future depended on me seeing this through. The next moments were a blur of movement and whispered strategy, my mind racing to absorb instructions and prepare for confrontation. Every step I took was deliberate, every action calculated to avoid alerting whoever was watching. The shadows outside the windows shifted, the sense of being hunted unmistakable. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, mingling with the distant hum of streetlights and the low groan of the house settling under its own weight. Fear was present, yes, but so was resolve. I could not fail. By the time the night gave way to the first hint of dawn, the confrontation had reached its apex. Files were secured, plans outlined, and for the first time, I glimpsed a path toward the truth, not just about Nathan, but about Daniel, my parents, and the network that had threatened our lives. Yet even as relief brushed against my consciousness, a lingering dread remained. The final revelation was still ahead, and it would strike at the very heart of everything I thought I knew. The moment of truth was almost here, and nothing would be the same after it hit. I returned home as the sun began to rise, the streets quiet and empty, but my heart thundered like a storm. Everything I had discovered in the last few days, the letters, the journals, the files, pressed against my mind with relentless urgency. I knew Daniel was waiting, pacing in the living room, his expression taut with tension. When he saw me, his eyes softened briefly, but there was no relief in his posture, only the anticipation of the final confrontation. The truth had been building like a tidal wave, and now it would crash through the walls of our home, leaving nothing untouched. I laid the files on the table between us, and he studied them silently. "You went through all of this," he murmured, voice a mixture of pride and fear. I nodded, swallowing hard. "I had to know, Daniel. Nathan's life, our lives. We've been living in the shadow of things we didn't understand. I needed to see the whole picture before I could act." He reached out, brushing a trembling hand over mine, but I pulled back, not out of distrust, but because the final revelation demanded clarity, not comfort. "Then it's time," he said quietly, and I felt the weight of the moment settle over us like a heavy cloak. We gathered my parents and Clara in the living room, the sunlight cutting through the curtains in sharp lines, illuminating the tension on every face. I took a deep breath, feeling the courage and fear swirling inside me like a storm. "There's something you all need to know," I began, voice trembling yet steady. "Everything we've discovered about Nathan, about Daniel, about what's been happening behind the scenes, it's bigger than any of us imagined." Their eyes followed me, wide and anxious, and I realized that this was the moment where everything would either break or finally make sense. Daniel stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Alice has uncovered the truth," he said, voice strong and clear. "Nathan was involved in something dangerous, a network that manipulates lives from the shadows. He trusted me to help him, to protect him and the people he loved. And for years, I did everything I could to keep your family safe, even when it meant hiding the full truth from Alice. My parents exchanged a look, shock and disbelief etched in every line of their faces. Clara whispered my name, as though she feared the enormity of what we were about to hear. I took a deep breath, my voice firmer now, the fear tempered by resolve. Nathan didn't just disappear. He was trying to expose this network. That's why he went missing, why no one could find him. And now, they might still be watching us. Every detail we've uncovered, every step we take, could put us in danger. But we know the truth, and we can act. My father's hands trembled, but he nodded slowly, the first sign of acceptance breaking through his shock. My mother's tears fell freely, but there was relief too, the release of years of silent worry. Then Daniel dropped the final bombshell. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice lower, heavier. "Alice, your family's connection to this network goes deeper than you realize. The night Nathan disappeared wasn't just an accident. Someone in this room, someone close, was being watched, and that's why we had to protect him. And you." My breath caught, and I glanced around the room, every familiar face suddenly shadowed with doubt. The air was thick with tension, the silence suffocating, as the enormity of Daniel's words sank in. Finally, I understood the truth, not just about danger, secrets, or hidden networks, but about love, sacrifice, and trust. Daniel had risked everything to protect me and my family. My parents had carried burdens they thought were theirs alone, and Nathan had fought battles we hadn't even imagined. I looked at Daniel, then at my family, and realized that despite the lies, the fear, and the danger, we were still together. And in that fragile, trembling moment, I knew one thing with certainty. The secrets had been revealed, the shadows confronted, and now, for the first time, we could begin to heal. The room was silent for a long moment, heavy with shock, relief, and the unspoken promise of survival. Then my father exhaled, a slow, shuddering breath, and said, "We face it together then." My mother nodded, holding Clara's hand tightly. I felt Daniel's fingers brush mine once more, steady and reassuring, and I realized that despite everything, despite the lies and dangers that had haunted us, we were still a family. The truth had come crashing down, shattering illusions, but it had also given us something stronger: clarity, unity, and the courage to face whatever shadows remained. And for the first time in years, I felt hope bloom inside me, fragile but undeniable, promising that whatever came next, we would survive it, together.